This content is brought to you by Algorand, which is the official sponsor of the Thinking Crypto channel and podcast. Algorand is building the technology to power the future of finance, the convergence of traditional and decentralized models into a unified system that is inclusive, frictionless, and secure. It is founded by Turing Award-winning cryptographer Silvio Micali. Algorand has developed a blockchain infrastructure that offers the interoperability and capacity to handle the volume of transactions needed for DeFi, financial institutions, and governments to smoothly transition into FutureFi. The technology of choice for more than 700 global organizations, Algorand is enabling the simple creation of next-generation financial products, protocols, and exchange of value. For more information, please visit algorand.com. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto channel, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Anthony Scaramucci, who's the founder of Skybridge Capital and Salt Conference. Anthony, great to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being back. What's going on with your background, though? We gotta talk about this. Okay, you're like a crypto guy. I gotta fix your background. Okay, I'm gonna have you call my stylist. Okay.
Absolutely needed.
Yeah, I'm going to put this way. This way you can see my Superman picture. Okay.
Yeah, I got to get some artwork, some books, kind of like what you got going there.
I'm counting on you.
Tell us about Skybridge. I read some news of your crypto exposure has grown significantly, up about 150% in Q3 of 2021. The last time we spoke, it was mainly Bitcoin. It sounds like you've expanded to other cryptos.
Yeah, so we're basically now in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a smaller layer one coin known as Algorand. The symbol is ALGO. It was invented by Silvio Micali. The ICO was in 2018. We love Algorand. It's a it's a coin we think is going to run large scale enterprises. So ultimately, big fan of Ethereum, love what they've done. We own a large position in Ethereum, and lots of smart contracts are being run off of it. But if you think of the gas fees and you think of the sometimes clunkiness of Ethereum, Algorand is sort of a new layer one, and we believe it solved for things known as the trilemma. So there's a security, decentralization, the ability to be stable, not go down like Ethereum and Solana, are the technical properties associated with Algorand. So we like it. There's going to be a couple of big corporate announcements coming of large companies after doing a year plus in due diligence are going to be using Algorand for areas of finance and tokenization of products. So that's one that we have a very big position in. When I say very big, probably 150, 180 million dollars. It's a big number for a small coin like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like you did your due diligence. You went through Solana, maybe Avalanche, and the other proof of stake or something.
Like those as well. I just think they've had big runs, and justifiably, there's big communities there. But I think this is going to be more unique. This is, you're not old enough to remember this, but I'll share living history with you. If you go back to the late 90s, you had things like Lycos, Ask Jeeves, Alta Vista, America Online. These were the portals and the search engines that were being used to make access to the TCP protocol, HTML protocol known as the internet. And when this company named Google came along, people laughed. They said, what the hell do we need that for? We already have this. And then people said, no, this is faster, more efficient, wider, deeper searching, has a native machine learning in it where it'll improve the searchability. And of course, it ate all of the other competitors. And so I think that's going to happen with Algorand. So that's why we have such a big position there.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Certainly Ethereum has a first mover advantage, kind of like the Yahoo, but then came along Google with a cleaner interface, better algorithm. How long do you think that might take, though? From we've seen a lot of the different dynamic that we have now is communities. And when you have a community behind you, you can maintain a certain level of dominance to a certain degree. But do you feel eventually the masses will wake up to, why am I paying ridiculous high fees? And then that transition would happen over to something like Algorand?
So it's interesting because these fees on Algorand are literally a fraction of what happens on Ethereum. Algorand also, because of the way it was designed by Professor Macaulay, has a net negative carbon effect. So it's not carbon neutral, but it's in fact carbon negative. And so I think that's also for big companies like technology companies, they like that as well. Right. So, what I would say to you is it's going to happen faster than the internet. It took Google about 3 years to underpin and knock off its competitors. Of course, it went public in 2000. It went public in August of 2004. It had already really established itself as the supreme pole position. I don't even think Algorand needs to do that. Remember, all Algorand needs to do, and they have this new improvement to its software layer to make it easier for programmers to use Algorand. And so that's coming out, I think, at the end of February. When that hits, I think you'll see a big improvement. Now, in the last month, we went from 16 million wallets to 18 million Algorand wallets. And I think people are starting to recognize that this is something that's going to take hold. So, could it happen faster than the 3-year assault and ascent that Google had in the internet? Yes. I think over the next 18 months, hopefully you'll invite me back. Either I'll be wrong and you can dunk me in the public square in the ice cold water, or I'll be right and you'll be like, wow, I wonder why I didn't listen to him and buy some of that.
Well, in full disclosure, I'm a big Algorand fan. I hold the ALGO token. I've spoken to Sean Ford quite a few times, and even the folks at ALGOFi, which just launched. So I'm on board, but I still, in the back of my mind, I think the things that I'm trying to figure out is the community, but adoption and real world use cases matter, and efficiency and scalability. So I think you're right. It just depends on the timeline.
Well, I mean, if and then if you know that, and I don't know how much you want me to share with your viewers and listeners, but then you must know that AXA XL has agreed to tokenize. They're going to, in the process of creating art-backed securities, and they are going to use the Algorand coin as the protocol and the backbone of that tokenization. And so that is one of the largest insurance companies in the world, French-based company. Needless to say, lots of bureaucracy there. And they've decided that they're going to use Algorand after literally spending a year looking at everything.
That's exciting and certainly big news. So to date, as far as assets under management for crypto, how much is that right now as far as the number?
So we were over $1 billion. We are now at about 875 million. So we've had a little bit of a slip. When I said that number, believe it or not, I was at $1 billion. Then if you talk to me a month later, I was at 1.2 billion. Again, I haven't added to the position, but this is just related to crypto volatility. And so there's weakness in the crypto markets, as you know, recently, including the first week here in January. So we're closer to like 850 to 875 right now.
So on that note, with the pullback that we're seeing, do you believe we're still in a bull market and that, there's still a blow off top to head towards? And if so, do you have a Bitcoin price prediction?
Well, I've been wrong. I mean, I think one of the problems with price predictions is like flipping a coin. And then when you're wrong, people say you're an imbecile, you were wrong. When Bitcoin was at 57,000 last February, I thought, given what I had perceived to be pretty large scale institutional demand, I thought Bitcoin would crest over 100,000 in 2021. I got that wrong. What did I get wrong? Among the things I got wrong, if you had asked me last year, would there be a cash Bitcoin ETF, I would have said yes, got that wrong. Although by October 6th, we had a Bitcoin futures ETF. And I'm surprised by that actually, because it's a little bit of administrative overreach that they allowed one but not the other. But we'll have to see what happens ultimately long term with the SEC. And I don't think until you get the ETF in Bitcoin, you're going to see the robust institutional demand that we were expecting in 2021. When you say, are we in a bull or a bear market? If you're going to measure Bitcoin the way we measure securities like in the stock market, we're in a bear market because it's off 35 to 40% from its high. If you want to look at this as a natively new financial instrument and a natively new market onto itself, then I would say that we're in a long-term secular bull market for Bitcoin, which, like other early adoption technology stories, has a volatility curve to it. And so, as an example, Amazon has been in a bull market since it went public. Let's just face it. Now, it's dropped in value 50%, at least 8 times, 85 to 90% one time, but it was in a bull market the whole time. You just had to have the patience and the fortitude to hang in there. If you put $10,000 in Amazon's IPO 24 years ago, the anniversary of that IPO will be May 15th, 1997. That's 25 years this coming May. 25 years, you put $10,000 in Amazon, it's worth $22 million today. So that's a bull market by anybody's description. But because in its early stages, it was new, people didn't like it. You had the Warren Buffetts and the Charlie Mungers of that time. They're still with us, but at that time they were railing on Amazon. And they were saying that how could it be worth more than Sears Roebuck? And you know the rest of the story. So to me, I think this is very similar to that. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think we're in a situation now where you and I will look back 3 years from now. I don't know if Bitcoin will be 20,000 before it gets to 150,000, but I do think it's getting to 150,000. And if you wanted me to give you a year-end price target, I'll get in trouble again by saying it will get to 100,000 this year. I think I was wrong on my prediction, but I think it's more as a result of timing than it is trajectory. But, again, as I'm speaking to you right now, Bitcoin's off 5.5% today. So, it's a weird market for Bitcoin right now.
Sure. And there's many folks who, look, all models are wrong, and we got to have a macro outlook, but it seems there's a lengthening cycles theory when you look at the math of how things have played out historically, and that could be playing out right now. I know guys like Raoul Pal, Dan Tapiero talked about 2022, maybe maybe towards the end of the year, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yes, I agree, but I also think that this is a huge opportunity to buy the weakness. And so if you're a long-term holder, price activity over the last 25, 30 days, trading days, which is basically 6 weeks of activity, you should be loving that. If you love Bitcoin at 68,000, you should really love it at 42,000.
Yep. Yeah, buy the dip, as they would say. You talked about the SEC or crypto regulations and ETFs. What are your thoughts on what's happening in the United States? Because it seems the SEC is kind of putting up quite a few roadblocks. There's the infrastructure bill debacle, but we are seeing more members of Congress rallying around crypto. Many are awakening to the technology, the potential it has for the United States. What do you think we need to see in 2022 to move in the right direction to allow innovation to flourish and not have companies leave the United States?
Well,
I know there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, listen, it's a really, really good question. I wish I could give you a great answer because unfortunately, any answer that I give you is laced with my experience in politics. I'm a failed politician, right? I got fired after 11 days in my appointed position in Washington but I did get an 11-day PhD in Washington scumbaggery. I can tell you that the powers that be know that it's important to regulate cryptocurrencies, the blockchain industries fairly, but they have political pressure on them not to. And so what I find ironic is that Bitcoin is actually a progressive idea. You know, you could, with Bitcoin and other blockchain technologies, you could help the underbanked portions of our population significantly. If these politicians would take the time to understand it, they would recognize that it's a massive delayering mechanism for the society, and it's taking out third parties and intermediaries, which is lowering the cost to the consumer. And it's also increasing the potential banking opportunity for people that are underbanked. You know, I'll just give you this quick example. The country of El Salvador has accepted now Bitcoin as legal tender. If you are an expatriate living in the United States, typically you're sending money back to your family members in El Salvador. Well, now you can go wallet to wallet. It costs virtually nothing, which is amazing. Years ago, or even last year, there was $400 million of charges to Western Union. Yep. So Western Union has lost that. And who's gained that? Well, that would be these people. They've gained it. And so if a progressive politician understood that, they should be for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, not against it. So I don't know if that dam is ever going to fully break, and that's unfortunate. So I would like to tell you, if we were in a normative society, we would have this regulation cleared up in the first half of 2022, and all of this capital, venture capital, and otherwise is flowing into the crypto and digital innovation economy would stay here in the U.S. But because it isn't, you've got Sam Bankman-Fried in the Bahamas. You've got CZ now in Dubai at Binance. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate to see this, because this is the future. You know, it's like, you know, if Warren Buffett doesn't like Amazon, too bad. Amazon doesn't care, you know, and Amazon doesn't care that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger doesn't like it, and neither does Bitcoin. You know, I mean, it's going to happen with or without the naysayers.
So do you think it's more of the crypto industry needing to lobby and educate members of Congress that eventually we'll get there, but we have to do our part, you know, because the banking industry and other traditional financial industries, they lobby very heavily. I'm sure they outspend crypto 100 to 1 or whatever it may be.
Yes, I think that's some of it. Unfortunately, it's a pay for play sort of operation in Washington. That's been true across the board. It's not just the banking industry. You know, listen, I'm in the hedge fund industry. We've kept the carried interest. Why have we been able to keep the carried interest? We have a very effective lobbying machine. It was taken out of the tax bill in 2017, and at midnight before the bill was signed, it was put back in. You know, I mean, so we know how the game works. I don't want to say these things overly too much cynicism, but we know how the game works, and we know how the game ought to work. And cryptocurrency, the United States, whatever our faults are, we have been the leader in financial services, new technologies related to financial services, the junk bond market, the mortgage-backed security markets, the derivative markets. And we should be the leader in what is the Web3 future, the blockchain future. But we may or may not be because of the regulation. I think that's sad, you know, and it's a signal of our political dysfunction.
I want to touch a bit on that political dysfunction in the economy later on, but do you expect other countries to follow suit what El Salvador is doing, maybe a bit of game theory with some of the other Latin American countries?
I do think so. I see well, I don't want to predict countries because I'm going to get that wrong, but I'll tell you that there'll probably be two Latin American, Central American, or South American countries that will start accepting Bitcoin as legal tender. And, the problem right now is Bitcoin has been weak for the last 3 months since its October high. And so that's slowing down the adoption. But the guys in El Salvador will tell you it was one of the best things that they've ever done, because they now have what they think is the currency of the future. And if Safadine Amos, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, is right, or others, we're mentioning Raoul Paul or these others, the adoption story for Bitcoin is just beginning. So just imagine if you get this right and you're in a Latin American country and you're getting it right where Bitcoin's at 40,000 on its way to 150,000, what that means to your citizens. So I'm optimistic. It's not going to move in a straight line, of course. You have to have the fortitude to see this through. We're talking about Amazon. As Jeff Bezos points out, when people give him those numbers, he will say, well, yeah, there were very few people, unlike me and a few others, that stayed the course. Most people got shook out of Amazon because of its volatility, what was taking place.
On that note of adoption, we saw Tesla add Bitcoin to their balance sheet. Obviously, Michael Saylor, he seems to be buying every day. And we're seeing some smaller companies putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Do you think we might see a major tech company like an Apple or a Google sometime this year, due to the high inflation, put Bitcoin on their balance sheet?
I do. I hope so. I mean, I can't say for certain, sure. But if I had to guess, my money is on Facebook or Apple, because of the exorbitant amounts of cash that they have on their balance sheets. I do believe that they will come through and eventually own some Bitcoin. But, the problem is, though, there's controversy related to it, because you don't want to get in the crosshairs of the regulators. When Elon Musk announced that he owned Bitcoin, and people said, well, it's consuming too much energy, he had to back up because he's getting a lot of subsidies, environmental subsidies, for his company, at Tesla. So to me, there's politics involved. Mm-hmm. If you had somebody like Elizabeth Warren, if she actually would take the time to understand what Bitcoin really is, become positive on Bitcoin, my guess is, even though these people likely own Bitcoin on their balance sheet right now, they're not going to announce it until there's better political wins associated with Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies.
Is Skybridge planning to do any investments in NFTs or the metaverse? And what are your thoughts on the boom of both respectively?
Yeah, so I think we will likely have a metaverse ETF. So like we have this actively managed crypto and digital economy innovation fund, 30 stocks in that portfolio, actively managed, very cheap right now, I might add. We will likely do the same thing with the metaverse, and we'll probably launch that in the first half of this year. So yes, as it relates to buying individual NFTs, I will say maybe. I think that market will likely experience a cooling off as the crypto markets have cooled off. And so I don't want to rule it out, but I want to be cautious and patient.
Sure. I want to get your thoughts on CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. They're going to be using the blockchain. I know, for example, the Marshall Islands, they were looking to build on the Algorand blockchain. And when I talked to Sean, he talked about other central banks who have been in conversations with them. Some people are calling this like a double-edged sword. CBDCs will be great, liquidity, tokenized fiat, and so forth. But in the United States, we have the Constitution, and how do we maintain our right to privacy and things like that? What is your thoughts on the macro level outlook on
it? I mean, I think, listen, I think that first of all, it's going to happen. Again, these things are happening whether you want them to or not, and whatever the strengths are and weaknesses of them, they're going to happen. The unveiling of the Chinese digital currency is likely imminent. Some people are saying they're going to unveil it at the Winter Olympics, which is coming up next month. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it's imminent. The U.S. is probably behind it, but they are working on it. Now, it could come in a number of different ways. It could be originating from the Fed, and they could be using a blockchain like Algorand to put it on top of. Or they may just adopt a package of stable coins, like the Circle, USDC, or Tether, or something like that, if they can get comfortable with it. Bob Diamond likes to point out, I don't know if you remember Bob, he's a CEO at Barclays. Mm-hmm. He's now at Atlas Merchant. He owns a very large piece of Circle with Jeremy Allaire. And he points out that the Fed wire was actually started by Citibank. They were electronically wiring money back and forth to banks, as opposed to making, paper transfers between each other. They were using electronic technology to do this. And the Fed got a hold of it and said, okay, that's really smart. We're going to regulate it, and we're going to call it the Fed wire. So, he likes to say that technology bubbles up from the private sector and then it crosses over into the government. That may be the way it happens. So is there a privacy issue? Certainly. Is there if you are a cynic and you're an Orwellian, you could say, oh my God, they've got cameras on me when I'm walking around in this urban area. They know my digital wallet, and they know how much digital money I have in my digital wallet, and they can take it from me. And I like to remind people, well, that is something that they've had on you now for the last 50 years, whether you realize it or not. They're tracking and have a good idea of everybody's cell phone numbers and what's being transmitted. And they also know through your social security number where your bank accounts are. So it's not like it's going to change that dramatically. I think when people hear that a authoritarian regime like China can start socially scoring people and then adding money or taking money out of their accounts pursuant to their arbitrary social scores, I think that scares people. But I don't see that scare in the U.S. I think it's unfounded at this point.
Yeah. I spoke to Chris Giancarlo, part of the Digital Dollar Project, and he's having that dialogue. So hopefully there are some guardrails put in place, but I do think CBDCs will be beneficial and for crypto and the economy and so forth. Okay, I love New York. You're a New Yorker. I'm thinking about moving back with my wife to Brooklyn Heights. What do you think about Mayor-elect Eric Adams and his goal to make crypto, or New York City, crypto friendly?
I love it, and we were helpful to him. We set him up with NYDIG to help him get the wallet together. He was the keynote speaker at our conference in September. He came to the Javits Center to open the event before the election. We have a very good relationship with him. Full disclosure, I raised money for his campaign. I raised money for his transition team. And I'm a New Yorker. And so I'm staying in New York. I'm not moving to Miami. I'm not moving to Florida. I'm a New Yorker. I want to help build back the city and make the city better. And Skybridge and me personally will make our contributions to that over time. And I think he's going to be a home run of a mayor. And, the only thing he has to do is the opposite of Bill de Blasio. That's why I said, whatever decision comes to him, just say, okay, what was the decision? Okay, I'll do the opposite of that. And he'll be a phenomenal mayor.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing, the execution of some of his plans, but I'm glad to see he's embracing tech and welcoming different crypto businesses and so forth. What's your outlook on the economy for 2022? Do you think inflation gets worse? Do you think the Fed actually raises rates? Thoughts on those?
So, I think the Fed has to cut back. The hawkish tone that the Fed is taking right now, you have a $9 trillion balance sheet. At some point, you're going to have to cut back. And so I understand why they were propping it up. I understand why they needed to prop it up. But I think it would be impossible not to think that there's going to be 1 to 3 hikes this year. I mean, it has to be. And so if people want to sell off the markets because of that, that's fine. I think offsetting those hikes will be a pretty robust economic environment. There'll be good earnings for those companies. Growth stocks are going to sell off as a result of this. but that's not going to really dampen their growth that much. So to me, I would tell people to stay the course, relax. I mean, don't overread the news, you know. But you've had 2 really tough years for the economy, 2 really tough years related to COVID. The Fed stepped in, they expanded the balance sheet to 9 trillion. What are they going to do? Expand the balance sheet to 18 trillion and take every stock up another 4x? It's not sensical. So I do expect them to cut back, and I think they're right to do so.
Do you think, though, it's a bit of trial and error on their part, given that we haven't experienced, a pandemic before, and some of the behavioral aspects of people have changed. Businesses are looking for workers. Some people are getting their checks from the government. People are leaving companies and doing different things. And the stock market has been doing well and so forth. But I guess my question is, can it get back to where they can raise rates, or we still have some pain to go through before we get there, because we have these variants and all these things happening as well?
Really good question. I do think it's shooting in the dark a little bit. I do think it's a laboratory experiment. I think they're going to be fine. By the way, you asked me about inflation. I'm in the transitory camp. Everyone gets mad at me on Wall Street, because they're not in the transitory camp. They think it's out of control. I think you have a huge supply chain dislocation as a result of COVID. And when the supply chain issues clear up, you're still getting overwhelmed with massive new technologies that are going to remake the economy once again and make it way more efficient, which is going to be deflationary. So yeah, there's short-term inflationary effects of what they did. There's short-term inflationary effects of all that stimulus money that got put out there. It distorted the labor market because some people said, hey, I'm not going to work. You're paying me, so I'm going to sit home. So we've got labor shortages around the country, which forced up prices in certain goods and services as a result of that. I think that's going to come to an end mid to late 2022. And I think people are going to be surprised at the inflation data. And you and I are going to be listening to television pundits say, oh, this is a surprising less than expected inflation number. And, and that's the likely outcome of all the things that have gone on right now.
One last question before we hit the wrap-up question, but this might be a hard question to answer at the top of your head. How do we fix the politics in the United States? Is it another party that's needed? How do we, I understand in civilization and the world, there's ebbs and flows. We go through bad, we go through good, great times. And then we evolve, as a society. But right now, seems we're very divided. Throw in the pandemic on top of that, it's even worse. Given that you've seen how Washington works, what do you think the ideal solution is?
Well, it's probably too complicated for our podcast, but I would say something that is super important to the country, and that the country needs amendments to the Constitution. You haven't had a real amendment in 50 plus years. The last amendment was 93. It was procedural. That's 29 years ago. The amendment prior to that was the Voter Rights Act, the 26th Amendment in 1965. Yet you had 27 amendments over 246 years. You probably should be amending the Constitution every 7 or 8 years. You really haven't had a meaningful amendment in our lifetimes. And the 2 amendments that I would recommend, one would be ending the way we do campaign financings. I think that the Citizens United was the Plessy versus Ferguson of campaign finance. What do I mean by that? Plessy versus Ferguson, back in the 1800s, they said you could have separate but equal facilities. Okay, and of course that ramped up the discrimination among the races, and you had white lunch counters and no black lunch counters, and you had black bathrooms versus white bathrooms. In the 1950s, Brown versus Board of Education sort of reversed that decision and allowed for the integration of our public school systems. And, one vote and one billionaire are not equal anymore. And so Citizens United needs to be displaced. And so that would be one thing I would want to see. The second thing I'd want to see is the end of gerrymandering. Let me ask you this. Are we in a real democracy if the politicians can pick their voters? Does that make us a real democracy? So that's what they're doing right now. And so we got to get them to stop doing that. Here's the landscape. Here's the demography of the population. And if you force them to no longer gerrymander and just accepted the districts the way they were originally formatted, well, guess what would happen? They would have to liquidate the extremists in their ideas. Remember, these are marketing competitions. And so what they do is they strain out through their gerrymandering the people that they perceive as their enemies, and they placate to a very ardent and strident extreme base. And I think that's very damaging to the country. So if you put those two things in place, and I've got 10 hours more of suggestions and solutions, but those two meta things would change our universe. Okay. And I think it would be very meaningful. And I think it's time, and you need real leadership to explain that to the American people over the voices of these self-interested politicians.
I agree with those suggestions, and we'll probably have to do another podcast to talk specifically about that. But wrap-up question here: if you could create your own metaverse, what would it be about? What would the theme be?
Well, I got so many ideas about that. Okay. I got so many ideas. I couldn't give you one theme because I would want a restaurant metaverse. I would want a fashion metaverse. But if you had a gun to my head, I'm going back to the 70s. Okay. And I'm creating a metaverse that looks like the gritty New York that I grew up in. And it has a disco theme to it. And there's a lot of bright lights and a lot of craziness going on. Now, I'm going to tell you something, okay? We had way more fun back then. We were less politically correct. We didn't give a shit about all this gender descriptions. We weren't overly sensitized to all these stupid microaggressions. And we had a lot of fun. And I worry about your generation because you're not allowed to fucking say anything anymore to anybody. Yeah. And so I'm going back to the 70s. Okay. It was politically incorrect. Go fuck yourselves and let's go have a good time.
Well, I agree with that because I did grow up in the 90s and the world has changed significantly. And I remember, even though I was still a kid and I had my teenage years then, but it was just a different world. And I think
nuts now. I think we've saddened ourselves too with all this like ridiculousness in social media, and I it's never going to happen, but I would love to end anonymity on social media. Okay. You want to say something to me, say it to my face, expose who you are, say it to my face. That would make the coarseness that we're experiencing right now go away. And because I got a lot of haters, my man, but when they come up to me, they want to take a selfie. They want to bullshit with me, and then they go back behind their keyboard and they'll tell me how much they hate me. Yeah. But let's end that lack of civility. That would be another thing I would want.
I think blockchain might be the solution to that. Once these networks are using blockchain and you can verify content and things like that.
Yeah, maybe that'll be it. Look, the world's going to change again. It's going to change in surprising ways. It'll be shocking ways. And even you as a young guy, you'll be like, whoa, I'm not ready for that. I was not ready for Bitcoin. I'm just going to be very honest. I looked at it. I said, that's a bunch of bullshit. And then I studied it. I said, okay, wait a minute. That isn't a bunch of bullshit. That's really going to work. That's going to be part of our future. And so you have to maintain your neuroplasticity and your willingness to adapt and move with what's happening in the society.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Great always to be on. Thanks for having me. Happy New Year. And we got to work on your background. Okay. I expect to see, you could always go with a 70s theme, by the way, if you want for your background. Okay.
That's true. I will look for some ideas.
All right. You be well.
Thanks, Anthony.
Bye.